ahead and get started. So it is my true delight to get to welcome Dr. Barbara Fredrickson from the University of North Carolina. We have been trying to get Barb to visit us for many years, and we're so excited that she's here. In fact, lots of organizations all over the world are always trying to get Barb to speak, including one in Brazil that's been asking her for years. So she's actually going to use the recording from today's talk and send it to Brazil so that they get to benefit from this talk as well. So just be aware if you ask a question during the middle or something, you might get heard in Brazil, just so you know. Pretty standard. Now, if you take a look at Barb's CV, if I were to kind of read out all of her awards and grants, I would use up her entire time. So I'm not going to do that. Instead, I'll just note that she ranks among the top 100th of 1% in terms of scholars' citation impact across 22 scientific fields. So she is truly, truly an outstanding scholar. And to me personally, as I was coming up in the field, she was really one of the legends and the heroes, somebody who I have always looked to for inspiration. She was really a founder of the study of positive emotions. She's somebody who has studied topics like love and shown that we can examine them in rigorous and exciting ways. She has also been really involved in through organizations like the International Positive Psychology Association in helping to kind of give psychology away and share that knowledge so broadly. And I think this example of her sending this talk she's here today to give us off to Brazil is just one sort of beautiful little example of how she's always striving to do that. Another big reason that I've always looked up to Barb is that she's just this warm, wonderful person, and everybody who knows her loves her. So may we all have such an impact on people through our careers. I think for all of the graduate students, she's really an inspiring figure, not only for her fantastic high impact career, but for the difference that she's made in so many people's lives through both her knowledge and her personality. And with that, please join me in welcoming Barb. I can also get this.
Probably fell off with the hug. Are we good? Okay. What a warm welcome. What a great example of positivity resonance. I'll touch on a more scientific definition of it later, but really thank you for the warm welcome and for showing up to learn more about this obscure area of affective science. Hopefully not that obscure, but the talk that I have for you today is a medley of things that I've been doing over the last several years on the consequences of positivity resonance, and then second half is new, talking about the conducive conditions, the precursors to it. So bear with me if it goes from being really smooth and polished to, oh yeah, and then I want to share this, very casual. So it's a new combination for me, but that makes it a little more exciting and useful. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. My lab at University of North Carolina is now nowhere near this large, but sometimes it's this large. This is a year that we did this massive in-lab study that required a really big staff of undergraduates. So the wonderful people who've helped me carry out this work. My work has also been generously funded by the National Institute of Health. Never the same one twice, basically because nobody funds well-being consistently, so we go to a lot of different ones. And hopefully more private foundations will be picking that up in the future. All of my work has been kind of stemming from a framework that I developed some time ago on trying to understand why humans have positive emotions to begin with, the broaden and build theory. I wrote about it first in Positivity. The talk that I'm sharing with you today was kind of given a precursor view in my book Love 2.0, but none of the work, the empirical work, is all since that book appeared. And this is a new collection of reprints from across my career that's accompanied with the stories behind the reprints. So we'll see if 17 people in the world are interested in that book when it comes out. I want to start with just a few basic assumptions. I know this is a department-wide talk. Not everybody is invested in the details of affective science or positive psychology. So I want to start with a few quick assumptions. I'm going to be focusing on talking about emotions. Emotions are brief. They last seconds, maybe minutes. So we're talking about a very momentary phenomenon, like a wave rising on an ocean that then quickly dissipates. Emotions are also embodied. They're not just thoughts rolling through our minds. They're also recruiting all kinds of physical sensations of feeling energized or de-energized. Positive emotions come in many different flavors. It's not all upbeat happiness, but also includes inspiration, serenity, amusement. This is a quilt made by one of the readers of Positivity who made this for her granddaughter. And I said, could I use that? It's just so beautiful. And positive emotions are subtle. And this is why we didn't have a science of positive emotions for so long. We know the phrase bad is stronger than good. Our brains are drawn to focus in on the bad, even though good is stacking up here. It often goes unnoticed. The other side of this valence asymmetry is that positive emotions are more frequent than negative emotions. And that's because of the greater frequency of positivity is why bad needs to scream so loud to get our attention. So that's why we have these key asymmetries. Positive emotions are not the end-all be-all of a good life, but they're a part of it. They're one facet of well-being. Having a meaningful life is also important. Having a psychologically rich life is also important. Having negative emotions is also an important part of a good life. Sometimes I find that just talking about positive emotions for a whole hour gets people to think I hate negative emotions. Negative emotions are also important. But within positive emotions, it's the positive emotions that are authentic and contextually appropriate that matter. This is what makes negative emotions most healthy and matter as well. They're authentic, contextually appropriate. Here's a good example of inauthentic, just feeling like you have to put on a smile like a uniform. And I just don't know why this guy is smiling. There is no parachute, he's just free falling. And so that's contextually inappropriate. But all the misuses of positive emotions tell us something. And there's an ancient saying about this, ancient Sufi prophet. There wouldn't be such a thing as counterfeit gold if there were no real gold somewhere. So in studying positive emotions, I'm trying to get past all the superficial ways positive emotions are exploited for marketing purposes or other things, and kind of take back the smile and understand what is so important about positive emotions that people want to fake them all the time. Getting back to the broaden and build theory, there's two core pieces of that that I'm going to reprise on for the work on positivity resonance. And one is that in the moment that people experience positive emotions, the brain takes in more information. Our peripheral vision expands, and we have a broader awareness. It's a subtle effect. It has some key boundary conditions, but having moments where by evolution's design, our minds are a little more open to take in context, helps us to learn and grow and be better resourced. So the long-term consequence of the uplift and openness that comes with authentic, contextually appropriate positive emotions is that we become better versions of ourselves. We build resources. And I use a pile of fruits and vegetables because, like our need to have more than just one stem of broccoli in a year, we need a rich daily diet of positive emotions in order to maintain health and well-being. And a consequence of the broaden and build effects of positive emotions, broadening happens in the moment, building happens over time. As we build more of those resources help us to capitalize on opportunities for positive emotion in daily life more. And so we can ignite upward spirals that help us buoy us along. Now, I used to think that all those positive emotions on the quilt were equally important, but my data ultimately convinced me that among all those fruits and vegetables, there are superfoods, which my son has told me is just a marketing concept. It's not real, but I still use the analogy because it fits. And that's what I want to argue that positivity resonance is. Collectively experienced positive emotions carry more broaden and build benefit than individually experienced positive emotions. And so I want to give you some examples of positivity resonance. My feeling touched by the intro and needing to hug Liz was, one example. Laughing with a friend would be another example. Celebrating a success with a coworker could be another example. Compassion, I think, is another example as well. And I use this because, or I point this out because, negative emotion is the most predominant, or the suffering is potentially the most attention-grabbing aspect of a moment of compassion, expressed compassion. But within that suffering, there's still an element of shared positivity, because if you're the person who's suffering, someone comes towards you and wants to support you, you feel seen, and that feeling seen feels good. And for the person who's able to do that and offer support to somebody who's going through a hard time, you can feel an appropriate sense of pride. Where's Jeff? Yes, appropriate sense of pride about doing something good, for somebody else. So yes, the suffering is there, but just because suffering is involved doesn't mean that positivity resonance can't occur. And I'll give you the definition that'll help you see why that's the case. Another example that I think is a really vivid one is, smiling at a baby. And I think this is important because it helps you remember that when we, how much the body is involved in this shared positivity. When we want to connect with a pre-verbal human, we have to do it with sort of a dance of facial expression and great attunement, because if you come on too strong, that baby's going to cry if you really try hard to make them laugh and take it too far. So there's a sensitivity to what's being felt by the other that keeps it in the realm of shared positivity. And developmental scientists have been really successful in showing how important these moments of synchronized positive connection are for infant development. And one of the most poignant findings from that field is the impact of having a depressed caregiver. So what a depressed caregiver doesn't do as much is mimic and get into the synchrony with the child. And that has been shown to have long-reaching effects, not just on emotional development, but on social and cognitive development for decades. So it's like babies need this stuff. It's like a nutrient for growth and health. And what I want to argue is that we all need this. It's not something that goes away as a human need just because we got old and more intellectual and word-based. It's part of what our human nature requires as a nutriment. So there's only a couple of slides that'll use the word love. Love 2.0 is the name of a book that first introduced this concept of positivity resonance. But when I am working in the scientific framework, it's always positivity resonance. But I've argued that it's the most elemental building block of love. It's the smallest unit of love, and make the case for that empirically only very recently. We have a paper that shows that the nonverbal cues that have been previously linked with love emerge during moments of positivity resonance, and the words that are known to be stably related to how people describe love come up for couples who show a lot of positivity resonance. So we're trying to build the empirical case that positivity is resonance is love, or an instance of love, but mostly that's been a rhetorical approach to getting people to pay attention to this kind of moment as really important, because we all agree love is important, but we need to understand it at a momentary level as well as all the other things love is. So the formal definition of positivity resonance is an interpersonally situated collective experience that's marked by momentary increases in three things. A co-experienced positive affect, but it's not any co-experienced positive affect. It's one that has a cross-person synchrony in carrying nonverbal cues. It's sort of other-oriented and kind. And also has a cross-person synchrony in biological responses. And those are, again, small moments of togetherness, as some have called it. And over time, having more moments like this is where you're seeing the broaden and build theory come back as a echo. Over time, that is a nutriment that's building a sense of rapport or chemistry, or a sense that we really clicked. It is also where our social bonds come from, I would argue, and also a sense of mutual commitment, loyalty, and trust. So things that we are always trying to build in organizations and in schools. I mean, they don't come out of nowhere, and you can't just tell people, trust me. It comes out of experiences like this, where people come to have a sense of trust. So I want to give you a quick sense of how we've measured this in different ways. And the first is our self-report measure, which is, we typically measure it at the episodic level. So I'd love you to think about, one episode of your day so far where you were interacting with somebody else. This is how we measure it. We ask people to think about, when were you interacting with either a stranger, close other, or someone at work? And when did that interaction start, and when did it end? And think about what happened, and then ask yourself, did you experience a mutual sense of warmth and concern? A mutual sense of being energized and uplifted in each other's company? And did you feel in sync with one another? These are the three that we use when we are doing, densely repeated measures. There are other items on our scale when we're doing just giving it as a one-time measure. We know that this is very reliably correlated with well-being. In our first study that introduced this measure, we linked it to flourishing mental health, less depression, less loneliness, fewer illness symptoms. We replicated all those effects during 2020 in the pandemic, and added in more meaning. And I just wanted to point out that one thing that we've learned about positivity resonance and meaning is that these moments of positive connection people have are the most meaningful moments of their day. Other research says, being social is the most meaningful moments of the day. If you statistically control for the positivity resonance, what's left over in social interaction is not meaningful. And that reduces people's sense of meaning. So it's the quality, the emotional quality of connection that drives that being social is meaningful piece. So one of the things we do in this work is, because we're trying to make the case that positivity resonance is important and different, we statistically control for the frequency of social interaction, and we statistically control for individually experienced positive emotions. So we're taking out a lot of the things that would co-vary with it quite a lot, and showing that positivity resonance correlates with all of these when you statistically control for the usual suspects. So that's where we started, by looking at people's individuals reporting on a collective emotional experience. That's kind of unsatisfying, because it's a collective level experience, so maybe we should look at it at the dyad level at least. And so a number of years ago, I was about to go on a sabbatical, and I was trying to dream up what would be the best data set to test whether, positivity resonance is like a health behavior. And I realized, wait a minute, I helped collect that data back when I was a postdoc. So 30 years after I was a postdoc, maybe it was 25 years after I was a postdoc, I went back to Bob Levinson's lab, dug through the archives, and found a study that had measured long-term marriages, and in particular had recruited a large for the time study of married couples where they were either married 15 years or more or 35 years or more. And if you're familiar with any of the work by Levinson and Gottman, you know that there's going to be a conflict conversation in there. And so there's a 15-minute conversation where couples were talking about an area of active disagreement. We focused in on the conflict conversation because those videotapes had been painstakingly coded already, and so we could pull some really rich data. There was also psychophysiological data, but this was the behavioral coding done by John Gottman's lab, where with the specific affect coding system. And for this, each second of each spouse's behavior is coded as positive, neutral, or negative. And if it's the speaker, you get these specific emotions as well. And in addition, I love this picture. This is the old school rating dial that was used. It was basically a dimmer switch from Radio Shack, if you remember Radio Shacks. I don't know. That would just, increase the electrical current when people turned it over to the very good side or decreased it. So that's how we got continuous ratings of subjective experience back then. And all of these data have been, the source of many different publications, but always about husbands and wives, and a little bit about the marriage, but never looked at from the dyadic level. And so we were interested in developing objective dyadic measures of positivity resonance. And that team of Bob's students and postdocs were the ones who really did all the heavy lifting with this work. Just sharing a little piece of it here. But with the rating dial data, we looked at, for that 15-minute conversation, 900 seconds, how many seconds did both spouses rate in the positive end of the dial? And so that was the co-experience positive affect. From the John Gottman SPAF coding, we got co-expressed positive affect. How many seconds did both partners express positive emotions at the same time? We also created a new coding system that was based on the nonverbal cues of love that Dr. Keltner and John Gonzaga had published on some years ago, but we made them dyadic by looking for nods, smiles, leaning in synchrony. So if both couples were nodding at the same time or leaning in at the same time, they were scored as higher on the synchronized nonverbal affiliation cues. We also looked at physiological synchrony. This was just one element from a larger paper that we worked on where we showed that there's more physiological synchrony during moments of shared positive affect measured either this way or this way. So here we're looking at the times when both spouses' heart rates are changing in the same direction during a positive affective experience. And then we created another coding system called behavioral indicators of positivity resonance. We shorthanded as BIPR. And that is one where people, instead of looking second by second, they look at a whole 30 seconds. And our coders are asked to judge, did positivity resonate between two people during this time? Were there shared smiles, shared tempo, shared laughter? And they just answer yes or no, or yes in abundance. So, and that was pretty rare. It was usually just present or absent during a 30-second period. And all of these hang together really nicely as a latent variable. And with the strongest indicator being this global coding system. And I just want to point that out because it is not practical for most people to do all of this at once, but they could do this with any archived videotape that you have of dyadic interaction. We know, I was interested in whether positivity resonance could predict health. These were midlife and older couples, and so you would expect that they're going to get worse health over time. These time points are about 6 years apart. So this is their health trajectories over 13 years. And so we know that if wives have above average positivity resonance in that conflict conversation at time 1, that their reports of chronic illness symptoms, they have a less steep trajectory of increase in chronic illness symptoms. We see something similar for husbands. Statistically, there's no, if you constrain them to be equal, there's no decrement to the model here. And so for husbands and wives, if people are above average in positivity resonance during a conflict conversation, one 15-minute conversation in the lab, their trajectory of chronic illness symptoms is less bad. So, and this works for the latent variable. This is the data based on the latent variable, but we get the same thing if we just look at the paper coding by itself as a direct indicator. We discovered this by accident, that there were 4 waves of data in the data set, and our measures were predicting who was still in the data set at time 4. So we went back and looked to see why were people missing from time 4. It wasn't because they were getting divorced. They were older people, they were dying. And so we went back and got official death records and found that we were able to predict from our measure of positivity resonance at time 1 in one 15-minute conversation, that there was a 78% decrease in expected mortality for each standard deviation higher in positivity resonance. And we statistically control for demographic differences, their health symptoms at the same time, their health behaviors at the same time that we were measuring positivity resonance, their individual level positive affect, how cheery they were in that conversation, and their marital satisfaction. Marital satisfaction had been linked to longevity, and this suggests that, I mean, our measure of positivity resonance also predicts marital satisfaction, but if you're, there's excess information in the actual quality of the interaction that doesn't get covered by the marital satisfaction index. I think there's a lot of wishful thinking about how satisfied people's marriages are that would show up on a self-report scale, but the behavior would potentially say something different. And this finding as well, we get both with the latent variable and with just the behavioral coding system that we developed, the BIPR. So that's one piece of evidence that positivity resonance should be considered a health behavior, very much the same as eating our fruits and vegetables and staying physically active. We know that being socially connected is important for health, and these daily moments may be the carriers of that. So having water is a good idea. Having focused so much on marriage, I want to point out that this is not just about close relationships. This is not just about the quality of your inner circle, that weak ties matter. This is from a data set where we asked people about weak ties in general. And we know that, people who are outside of your inner circle, positivity resonance with weak ties independently predicts all these good aspects of positive well-being, flourishing mental health, meaning in life, belonging. This is statistically independent of the benefits of the quality of our close ties, and also predicts lower levels of depression, stress, and loneliness. So the emotional quality of these weak tie connections, again, controlling for the frequency of those interactions. The emotional quality is a huge contributor to our mental health that I think we often ignore. There's people are thinking about the loneliness epidemic as I need more friends, or I need more people in their trusted inner circle. But the outer circle and then the strangers and no ties are equally as important, the data suggest. And it's kind of a funny misnomer we're realizing. Strong ties kind of implies that what you get from weak ties is a watered down version of what you get from strong ties. I think there are unique benefits to our interactions with the weak ties, and in particular, relating to community benefits in terms of how people are interacting in community. We've done one experiment where we created a micro intervention. Some of you may know that some of my earlier work, we did research on the impact of learning meditation. And we published lots of cool things on it. I think meditation is important, but not everybody in the world is going to take a meditation workshop. We need to really understand these lighter ways of influencing people's well-being. So we created a micro intervention that you've kind of had the macro intervention version of it in these talks so far. We just gave people a little bit of scientific evidence that these moments of connection matter. Quality moments of connection, even with people you barely know, matter. So go have some. So we're not really teaching people skills. We're just reminding people to prioritize these connections. In this study, we had a condition that especially focused on strangers and weak ties. And we know from this work that this, very light micro intervention, which I think of as very short psychoeducation, followed by reminders. Here in this particular study, we thought that sending people the same email every day for 35 days would be a good way to remind them. The intervention did work, but I think people just told us we ignored your emails because it's the same one every day. So, but we did find that we could increase the connection quality, and we also find that we increase people's pro-social tendencies, that people become more pro-social in step with improvements in the quality of their everyday social connections. So pro-social tendencies, another way to frame it is in terms of other-oriented virtues. We looked at 3. The first central one we looked at was the element of spirituality, which is universal interconnectedness, not just the part where you feel like there's a oneness across humanity. And we measured this in a daily reporting study where people said, today I had a feeling of strong connection to all life. We also asked people whether they set aside time for an activity they considered to be spiritual. We also measured altruism or kindness, experienced as compassion for others, or going out of your way to help somebody. And we also measured humility, felt that you have strengths and flaws and you let other people enjoy the limelight. We thought that both, if you think of people as interconnected and there's more of a sense of equality there, that kindness and humility would flow from that. That's the logic that we use to unite these. And Jenny Jo was the powerhouse behind the statistical analyses on this work. But I'll just give you the high-level view of this experimental study. We predicted that our micro-intervention would lead to growth and positivity resonance. It did. I already shared that. We thought it would lead to growth in the pro-social tendencies, and it did. We thought that we would see same-day associations between positivity resonance and pro-social tendencies. We saw that with in-person effects. And we thought that the intervention would strengthen that connection, sort of tighten the same-day coupling between positivity resonance and pro-social tendencies, and it did. Now, this is cool to know that the micro-intervention changed people's behavior and pro-social tendencies, but you can argue this is all self-report. And also, so what? This next study is still going to be self-report, so I don't know why I said that as a shortcoming, but it has a so what. And during the pandemic, we were able to test the so what. So we were about to start this major lab study, and we had to shut everything down and pivot to online studies like everybody did. But we tried to think about what would make our online studies especially likely to be have a chance to get into the journals when everybody's doing survey research now. So we did day reconstruction method and also longitudinal studies. So these are data based on April, May, and June of 2020, where in time one, we're measuring people's positivity resonance in their interactions, even in their more limited interactions that they're having. This was right sort of beginning of lockdown in the US. This is nationwide data. We had, from time two, we got a latent variable of all those pro-social tendencies. And at time three, we measured how often you were washing your hands, wearing a mask, honoring social distancing. And we find that the link, we can predict people's adherence to these behaviors that are well established as protecting public health from the quality of their interactions as mediated through their pro-social tendencies. So the so what is that we care about community when, to the extent that we've experienced high quality connection. And we replicated this in the fall of 2020, and this was especially with positivity resonance with strangers and weak ties. Predicts pro-social tendencies, replicating the springtime studies. We replicated the hygienic behavior effect and extended it to people's favorable views to the COVID vaccine, which was not then yet available, but was becoming very close to being available. And we control for people's political leanings in here, and we still see the effects. So positivity resonance, not just for your health. Well, of course, it's for your health and the other person's health too. So it's not sort of a selfish, doing this just for my own health. It benefits others as well. But it's also for the common good in terms of increasing people's pro-social tendencies and their concern for public health. So this is a summary of the multi-level consequences of positivity resonance. At the individual level, we know it's related to mental health, physical health. At the collective level, communal goodwill and public health. So I hope I've convinced you it's a state worth cultivating and worth prioritizing. And so even though it's short-lived, just like that wave on the ocean, it is also forever renewable, that we have continual opportunities every time we come in contact with another human to cultivate these high quality connections. So, but it's not always easy to figure out how to do that. And there was a great analogy that I heard Richard Hackman share about creativity like several decades ago, and it really stuck with me. And that is, while we can't like directly control whether positive emotions and positivity resonance emerge, we can set the conditions for it to emerge. It's a natural process, and we can set the conditions. The reason I'm showing a plane here is that if you're a pilot, anybody pilot in the room? Okay, so my kind of messing up the analogy will not necessarily be noticed. But when a pilot lands a plane, they're not flying the plane to the ground. You're setting the conditions for a natural process to occur slowly and safely. Gravity is what lands the plane, not the efforts of the pilot. Something to do with the flaps and the speed, whatever. I mean, that's the part that I don't know. But the pilot is setting the conditions for a natural process to unfold. We don't control the natural process, but we can set the conditions for it. So this is where I want to turn to the beginnings of some work that is represents sort of a pivot in my research program a number of years ago, where we became interested in the multi-level conducive conditions for positivity resonance to emerge. So this is where the talk gets new, and bear with me with some of it being the first time it's been in a presentation. So at the episode level, I'm just going to give you a preview of where I'm going with this so that you can have a little bit of a roadmap. We're interested in real-time sensory connection and perceived safety. At the individual level, generalized trust, high-quality listening. At the collective level, lesser anticipated discrimination, greater civic engagement. At the structural level, lesser economic inequality, and a built environment that's conducive to interaction. So I want to give you a little taste of the evidence that we have for each of these so that we can begin to see how much context of the moment, context of an individual's beliefs, context of sort of a collective involvement, and the broader structural level matter as to shaping the quality of interaction. So at the episode level, we've done a number of studies that use the day reconstruction method. And this is where people report on yesterday, from when they woke up to when they went to bed, and divide the day into a number of episodes. And for each episode, fill out a detailed survey of whatever you like. But we were really interested in social connection and emotional experience. And so in one study, we had more than 400 social episodes across a sample of 120. In another study, we had more than 1,000 social episodes. And from those social episodes, we also asked, how were they social? Were you interacting face-to-face? Were you interacting by text? Were you interacting by video? And both between and within persons, the more time you spend in face-to-face interaction, the more perceived positivity resonance people report. There's no similar effects for time spent remotely connected. I really feel like positivity resonance is that je ne sais quoi that's missing when you're connecting on Zoom that makes you feel de-energized afterwards instead of energized. So, you know, there's some data to say that people have like these echoes of this quality connection, but it's not the same as seeing the smile bloom on somebody else's face right when it's blooming on your face, and sort of feeling that sense of energy building up and uplift. One thing I don't have data on yet, but I will very soon, because we just finished a randomized controlled trial, small scale, with our micro intervention, where we ask people about, we use a event reconstruction and not a day reconstruction to ask about your last interaction with a stranger and a weak tie and a close other. And for the strangers and the weak ties, we ask, take a moment to picture the place or the setting where you were interacting with that person, either the stranger or the weak tie. And we measured safety as a property of the context that people are in during the entire time when you were in that setting. Did you feel that if you needed help, somebody would help you? And so we're trying to get out separate from a perceived threat, but just like if the occasion were to happen where you needed help, would there be somebody to help you? Our hypothesis is that when episodes are marked by greater perceived safety in that sense, they'll be more likely to produce high quality connection. That at the individual level, we've linked generalized trust. So people in my town can be trusted. I'm showing a wallet because one of our items is, if you lost your wallet, what are the chances that it would be returned to you? And in one study, we know that it's correlated strongly with positivity resonance with strangers, that people feel more generalized trust for their community, that they are more likely to have had a high quality connection with a stranger yesterday. So it's not generalized trust related to that stranger, they're measured completely separately. In another study, we looked experimentally manipulate generalized trust by having people imagine they moved to a new town, they lost their wallet, the neighbor comes by and says, you know, oh yeah, you'll never get that back. Or, oh yeah, well, you know, there's a good chance you'll get that back because that's what people do here. You know, so we pretty strong manipulation that predicts people's anticipated positivity resonance with a stranger in this new hypothetical town. So generalized trust matters. This is kind of a poignant finding because generalized trust has really taken a dive in the last decade or more. Also at the individual level, on a rosier note, the quality of people's listening to one another matters. And this is work that my recent graduate student, now postdoc with Jillian Sandstrom, has looked at the quality of people's listening as they're interacting with strangers, and looking at what predicts whether this high quality emerges. And a lot of times listening quality is measured by the speaker's perception of what the listener did, but we wanted to look at actual behavioral indicators of listening. So Taylor developed a coding system which is based on observed listening behaviors. Now, listening is something that happens inside the head, but there are also observable behaviors that communicate to a speaker that somebody was listening well. And those are follow-up questions and verbal validation. Those two are argued to be better indicators of listening quality than nodding, smiling, you know, which can be used deceptively. You know, so people could be thinking about something else and like nodding at you, but if they ask a good follow-up question, you know that what you said landed in their mind and they're thinking about it. And so we connected these two in conversations people were having with strangers. We looked at follow-up questions and verbal validation, how they related to our measures of positivity resonance, both as reported by participants and their partner, and as coded with the behavioral indicators of positivity resonance, or the Bipper scale. And we see that for partner reported, the red line, and the behavioral indicators of positivity resonance, both of these indicators of high quality listening, which is an individual action. Listening is something that a listener is doing. It's an individual action, is predicting this collective experience of high quality. We see it, you know, trends for the participant reported positivity resonance, but less of a clear indication of that being so tightly related. But another measure of the quality of connection that has drawn our attention and other researchers lately is conversational reaction time, that people who respond to one another quickly in an interaction, especially when it's strangers interacting, that has been related to connection quality. And so we find that the follow-up questions and verbal validation are very strongly inversely related to the conversational reaction time. So for both partners and participants, their behavior is showing that those follow-up questions are leading to a better rapport. So these data were drawn archivally from one of our micro interventions. And so what Taylor West looked at is whether our intervention effectiveness, that we know increased positivity resonance with strangers, was carried by these observed listening behaviors. And we found that it was. So it's like we never instructed our participants to focus on follow-up questions and listening behaviors, but if you ask people, create more positive connections, one way they intuitively seem to do it is through listening more carefully, asking more questions. So this was a micro intervention where we gave people the micro intervention 2 days prior. 2 days later, they came into the lab to do the Aaron closeness task. Some of you may be familiar with it, of asking each other questions of increasing disclosure. And with a Confederate. That's why we had that big team there. We had an army of Confederates who were trained to mimic the same level of disclosure as the participant. So that's at the individual level. Anticipated discrimination was something that one of my current doctoral students, Catherine Berman, has gotten very interested in, and she's measured it with a measure that is really based on intersectionality in discrimination. So we ask people, these next questions have to do with who you are, which is both how you describe yourself and how others might describe you. And then we give them a long list of things that, typically are who you are that affect how people see you. And then we ask a few questions. Because of who I am, strangers may treat me with less respect than other people. Because of who I am, strangers may not want to get to know me. Because of who I am, strangers may avoid me. So people are answering questions about whether they think they are carrying an identity that makes strangers less likely to interact with them. We do know that this anticipated discrimination comes from people's everyday experiences of discrimination. It's not coming out of nowhere. In other data sets, we're able to link experienced everyday discrimination to anticipated discrimination. And as people are anticipating possible discrimination, they're having lower quality connections with strangers in daily life. So this is, again, if positivity resonance is a health behavior that contributes to people's overall well-being, this is a really important area to focus in on in terms of health disparities. And we do know that that is mediated by reductions, higher anticipated discrimination, reductions in generalized trust. Those reductions in generalized trust are what partially accounts for the lower quality interactions with strangers. We get the same effect for weak ties. In this particular study, we separated out weak ties and strangers, see similar effects. Another thing that Catherine Berman has been interested in at the collective level is how much people are contributing to the collective by looking at people's self-reports of their volunteering. So we have their self-reported civic engagement. That's related to their sense of, or their perceived positivity resonance with strangers. Again, we're not asking about their positivity resonance while they're engaging in their volunteer activities. It's just, have you historically engaged in volunteer activities this past month? And tell me about an interaction you had with a stranger yesterday. And we find that is also related to the emotional quality of connection with weak ties. And so again, it can help us understand aspects to promote that will increase opportunities for high quality connection. Economic inequality is something that has been, on a rapid increase in step with the change in generalized trust. This also contours the quality of our connections with strangers in our communities. This is a study where we randomize people to different levels of perceived economic inequality using a manipulation that had been developed by others in the literature. You give people feedback on their zip code and say that you're in this level or this level of economic inequality, generally effective. And that leads to, if you increase people's perception of the economic inequality of their community and ask them to anticipate an interaction with a stranger, they report that the quality of that interaction is likely to be lower, and that is mediated by a reduced sense of generalized trust. So a lesser sense of economic inequality, it's important to phrase it that way because we're not going to get economic equality, but a lesser economic inequality could be beneficial for supporting positivity resonance in the community. And the last finding I want to share is about the built environment. And here we're gearing up to do a study where we're collecting data from people all over the country, and we'll look at, county level and zip code level and state level aspects of the environment. But here we asked people's self-reported walkability of their community. There are sidewalks on most streets in my neighborhood. There are crosswalks in my neighborhood. We've made sure that these have nothing to do with social. It's built. So it's not like there are interesting things to do in my neighborhood, which is another item on this scale, but we wanted to take out all the social pieces. And that predicts positivity resonance with strangers. And this isn't anticipated positivity resonance with strangers. This is actual what you experienced yesterday is related to neighborhood walking environment. And the same is true for weak ties. I want to close by tying these conducive, multi-level conducive conditions to a new and I think very necessary perspective within positive psychology, which is we need to get past looking at individual well-being as an individual place for intervening just at the level of individuals and only caring about individuals. And I wanted to point out my friend and colleague in the field, Mike Steger, who has a great new paper on regenerative positive psychology. And he argues that positive psychology has done quite well at understanding individual well-being, but completely failed at looking at contextual factors or even positive institutions that support well-being. And so he's arguing that we need to expand our definition of well-being to include systems and contexts that support well-being. And another way to do that is once you expand to include systems, we need to study those systems, well-being systems, and then learn how to foster them. And beyond that, because we're psychologists interested in human behavior, we need to understand how to see when and how to motivate people to become stewards of those systems, to care for those systems, to become kind of a gardener of the collective good. So not just thinking about your own well-being, but thinking about communal well-being by tending the larger big picture garden of all the things that are conducive to it. So I'd like to, my goal is to kind of take all these multi-level conducive conditions that my team and I have been working on and try to fit them into this framework of trying to understand, okay, these are some of the puzzle pieces that describe some of the aspects of those systems. It's just a handful of puzzle pieces in something that you need like 1,000. I have 8 pieces of that puzzle, not the 1,000 pieces. But at the episode level, we have, we can create more contexts where you are interacting with people in person instead of doing things remote. That can support positivity resonance. Figuring out how to help people feel more safe wherever they are is super important as well. Generalized trust, getting better at listening to one another can matter at the collective level. Helping people to feel like they belong, that people aren't going to be avoiding them, is going to be important, as well as supporting civic engagement, lesser economic inequality, more walkability, more sidewalks. So with that, I want to thank you for your kind attention. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much. Since Liz has to teach, I am going to moderate questions, but I think Barb probably can take them herself. Yeah, thank you for such an amazing talk. I really learned a lot. Thank you.
Yes, Liz, since you have to go.
So many interesting things, but I think the one that my brain is still like spinning on is that finding you showed about the 78% reduction in mortality as a result of positive resonance or linked with. And I'm just like, I just can't even, I think in psychology, we find ourselves defending small effects, but that effect is so large that it's
for one standard
standard deviation that you could have 78%. So I'm just curious to hear more, like if you kind of your brain has spun on that, what you think might be going on, and maybe just a little bit more context in terms of like how old were those, like are we seeing that like the people who were really, really low in positivity resonance are dying super early, or is it, just anything?
Yeah. So those were midlife couples and older couples when they started. So they were in their 40s to 50s to 60 to 70s. So, and we followed them. Our date of assessment was 30 years later. It was a particular day in 2020. So we just saw whether they were alive or not on that date. It obviously this 15-minute conversation is not the thing that kept them alive. We're taking that to be representative of the way they interact with people in daily life, right? And so if these moments are health behaviors, they're nutriments that we need to stay healthy, then you should see that having an impoverished life where they're less prevalent is potentially sort of a long-term harm. I think of it as these moments communicate to our creature brain that we're safe, that other people have our back. I mean, we know from Shelley Gable's work that people know their degree of social support by how things go when they go right. Do you know what I mean? Sort of like when you celebrate and capitalize on somebody else's good news, the benefit of it is, if they're here for me in these good times, they'll probably be here for me again. So, people are building resources from this, building social capital, but also just at a physiological level, if this is more frequent in your day, you may feel like you belong, you're safe. There's like, you not have to be vigilant as much, the things that would be taxing on a body. So that's how I think of it. But we discovered that completely by accident because we were looking at the fourth wave of data and we saw, hey, where are people going? Our variables predicting that. That's weird. And so we really didn't know if it was going to be divorce or death at that point. And then we learned it was those couples stayed together because they had already been together either 15 or 35 years in that data set.
Thanks so much, Barb. That was awesome. It was really cool. My question was actually about that study also. And you kind of got at it, but I'm just really curious to what extent is this, because what you're talking about with positivity resonance is by definition not something that exists within one person, right? And so to what extent to have that, you need both people. Like if I try to be resonant with someone who's just not, it's not going to work. And so presumably in that marriage study, those were the couples who both had all the things that it takes and they were staying
during
together.
The conflict conversation.
Exactly. Yeah. Then you're generalizing it to like, this can happen with strangers. This can happen, and I agree. I totally, I buy that.
Not in the same exact, certainly not at the same level.
Okay.
Put it that way.
Okay. Well, that was kind of my question. It's sort of like to, if I'm open to like, I want to be positively resonant, but
it's okay. Jess wants to.
I need the P, right? So, I guess that's sort of my question. Is this thing that you're sort of your key variable that, the answer to all of our problems to some extent? You didn't say that, I'm saying that. Is this something that can exist within a person, or is it really something that has to be sort of greater than the sum of its parts, I guess I would say?
Yeah, I think it is the collective piece there. And that's, so a question that when I framed a whole talk on love, people would say, but, I can feel love if the other person doesn't love me back. And, but the concept is defined to be collective. And we statistically try to control for the individual level kind of traits or the stable things. It's imperfect, but we are able to show that something collective is what's driving the effects. Not that the individual things don't matter, but they matter in different ways. One place that the weak ties and strangers, in terms of perceived positivity resonance, the ratings go from a 0 to 100 scale. People are willing to go up in that high end of a scale for a close other, like, oh, like 90% of the time we were in the units. I don't think that's really probably true, but they're really using the high end of the scale for close others. For strangers and weak ties, they'll be really in the middle of the scale, mostly, very rarely towards the end. So you get huge mean level differences between close ties and weak ties, but they each predict these things equally strongly, even though you're at a very different range of the scale. So it's like a smaller, more distant, muted version, but the properties and what it connects to are similar. So
that's really, I just think so much of, because in psychology we study things at the individual level almost always. So
yeah,
it's really interesting.
Well, that's, I mean, part of what got me interested in this is cultural psychology and like looking at, you know, how emotions are forged between people. And there's a lot of adjacent areas to psychology where this influence on quality of connection. Jane Dutton's work in particular has been really influential to me. And so I think that leveling up has a lot of value in looking at things at the dyad, and I haven't done yet the whole group level, but that could be cool. Lots of opportunities. We'll get you next.
Hi.
Oh, sorry.
Great. That was a great, wonderful talk. It's so interesting to see how we understand each other so socially. One of my big question was throughout this is, did you take a look at some individuals that had social anxiety and things like this? And did some of these systems that you developed, did they, I guess, get worse in their responses or better in their responses when you had people coming towards them with social behaviors? Because I would feel that would be a negative response from those individuals. And so did you find that there was a positive result in that or a negative result in that?
We have looked at individual differences in kind of a clumsy, crude way. A lot of times we just use the 10-item personality, you know, big five measured poorly in terms of very few items. And we find that introversion, extroversion doesn't drive these effects. I'm probably the most introverted person in this room, maybe. I don't know, I'm a bunch of academics, maybe not. But if I've ever been in a room with non-academics, I'm like way on the extreme of introversion. And I think it's just the tolerance for how much of your day you could devote to this would be different in introverts. Or maybe there's more selectivity in terms of who you would feel most safe with. But once it emerges, my sense is that it's still a nutriment, still a good that's going to contribute to health. We are starting to ask people whether they've been diagnosed with any of these, 10 things that might affect depression, social anxiety, autism spectrum, certain other disorders that should affect how expressive they might be, how much they might respond to somebody else's smile. So we'll have more data on that in the future, but can't answer that now. So it was over here and here.
That was actually basically my question. So.
Oh, okay. Jay-Z?
Oh, sorry.
I'm bracing myself. I heard you ask tough questions.
No, no, I have a question about polarization. Okay. So I think your work speaks to the kind of the escalation, but the positive side of escalation. What about the negative side, with the negativity resonance? Do you think that's a phenomenon? There's argument to think negativity doesn't spiral because one party just stops and leaves. But I wonder how you would, theoretically, you can see the mirror image of positive spiral, right? Which is the negative.
There's a way in which, even in our married couples, the shared negativity did not have the shared physiological responses that shared positivity did. And one of the things I noticed is that it could be very simple. Shared positivity, people make eye contact. When you make eye contact with someone, you have more of a chance to sort of catch their emotions and like sort of come to feel the same way. With when each partner is expressing negativity, they're like looking past each other, they're looking, and then one person might be looking down, kind of thinking what they're going to say. So it's like attack, defend, attack, defend. So it's less of the same. So I do think negative emotions can be contagious and co-experienced, but I don't think it's going to be a mirror image. I think there are different kinds of processes, and one huge conduit for it being different with positive emotions is people are more likely to make eye contact. But that said, one of my former students, Taylor West, has been really interested in political polarization and interested in how, and we have data to show that people's everyday conversations with strangers and acquaintances, weak ties, predicts their openness to listening to someone with a different opinion than them. So she's looking at intellectual humility enacted as, yeah, I'm willing to listen to this person for how many minutes, talk about their view that's different from your own view. And do you think you could learn something from a conversation with that person? So she, in her dissertation, found connections between the quality of interaction with people having their own daily life with their openness to have that sort of intellectually humble interaction with people who have different views. And then in another study, she manipulated people's, she does workplace interaction study where people, faculty and staff at UNC were invited to be part of this study on connections, and they had to be willing to be assigned to go have coffee with your closest work friend or someone you barely knew at work. And then after that, we have some vignettes that ask people about workplace issues where they might have differing views, and are you open to collaborating with someone on that? Those who interacted with someone they barely knew from work showed more openness. So I do feel like that communal orientation is part of a little bit of a buffer against increasing polarization. But of course, this requires face-to-face interactions and things that, whereas we know that algorithms are exacerbating the political polarization and the, kind of selecting for certain emotions more than others, and bringing up the anger. So there's good reason to look at how these kinds of connections are happening online versus in the real world and so on. We focused on the real world, but we need to understand what is it being replaced with, and when can it be good and when is it not good. So, thank you.
Thank you so much for this micro intervention. I was really curious about what you were saying about the psychoeducation piece, and I was wondering if you got some sort of information from the people on like what changed in their behavior. Like, is it that when they know this, they're just more present, and like presence is a big part about positivity resonance, or was it that they listened more, or what kind of change?
The one study on high quality listening suggested that they did show these behavioral signs of good quality listening, asking follow-up questions, verbal validation. And verbal validation couldn't have been, oh, that happened to me too. It had to be like, oh, that must have been tough, or like showing an appreciation for what somebody said. In a way, I have another former doctoral student, Lana Catalino, who has introduced this idea of prioritizing positivity, that people who arrange their day in a way to prioritize positivity benefit from positivity more. And then one day I realized, oh, that's why I've written books for a general audience, because I'm not trying to change the personality, I'm trying to change the priorities. Like, these kinds of interactions are important. You should not blow past them. You should pay attention, be present. So we don't have good data on sort of the micro level. Yeah, I went and wanted to be more present, but we do have day reconstructions where people are describing every interaction that they had with every person across a day, and they show increased perceived positivity resonance in each of these interactions with weak ties, with strangers, and with close ties, even though the intervention was with weak ties. So they're kind of bringing more attention to the quality of connection, even to, we found that in our in the micro intervention study that happened over 35 days, even though we told people to really focus on strangers and acquaintances, it benefited close ties too. So no collateral damage in terms of opportunity cost there. So thanks for your question. Oh, okay.
Yeah, I'll see you later at dinner so we can talk more, but I wanted to ask this question because I wanted everybody to hear your answer.
Oh.
So when we came back from the pandemic, we didn't really come back. My lab said we're going to start having in-person meetings. And that first time we were all laughing. And I came back and I was like, oh, I haven't heard them laughing in a long time because a lot of people mute on Zoom. And it was like my face hurt a little, like we got cracked up about something. But I've noticed this tendency, even though we're not in the pandemic anymore, it's just so much easier to go online.
Yeah.
And I was just wondering what you say to us. I think your framing as like a well-being or health interventions are really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I say we're going to have in-person lab meetings, but say something just minor happens. You're like, well, we'll go online.
Yeah.
We'll have the speaker online. We'll have this meeting online. And it's easier. You don't have to commute.
Right.
So like, give us your pitch, not a scientific question. What do you
Yeah.
say in your department or to
Yeah.
departments who are struggling? Because there's clearly a group of people who prefer to be online. You also want to accommodate them.
Yeah.
Like, how do you balance these
Yeah.
different things?
I probably some of you did this too, but I taught hybrid because of a lot of people in 2021 and fall of 2020 weren't comfortable coming in. Boy, that's awful. I mean, it really ruins it for any rapport in the room because you're kind of stopping to see if everybody here. It turns the whole interaction into virtual. So I strongly favor the in-person, but I use an analogy that Lana Catalino used for prioritizing positivity. Like, you know that if you get together with your friends and have that dinner party, it's going to be so much fun, but it's a lot of work. You got to go to the grocery store. You got to figure out what you're shopping. You know, we put in sweat equity to create the goods for that. So what we've tried to do in our own social psych program at Carolina is pick the days that we're going to be in. So that we have Mondays and Wednesdays, we'll all be in, then if you show up on a Tuesday, you're like, hey, nobody's here, you know, because everybody's doing their home thing and their Zoom meetings that day. So at least we're saying, if you make the effort to come in, others will be here, you know. So it's like the days that we have our talks and stuff, and our card game. So that's another thing that we, instead of having faculty meetings with the social psych faculty, we learned this from Chet and Sco. That's a card game that had been played almost every day at noon in the 60s and 70s among the faculty. He taught it to us before we retired, and we play it once a week instead of having a faculty meeting. We laugh, we tease each other, we play cards, and then talk about graduate admissions or whatever else we need to talk about in addition. So it's an investment, but the payoff is probably better science and better health. So that would be my overstretched advice.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.